Hello. Today is Wednesday, sorry, the 23rd of July here in New Zealand. But Ozzy Osbourne was announced that he died today. Whatever, I don't know where he was. He died. Maybe he was in England or maybe in America. I think he was actually living in England at the time, wasn't he? But regardless, it probably wasn't the 23rd there. It might have been the 22nd. So I woke up this morning for work at about 5 a.m. and I was flicking through something and I saw someone had posted a picture of him on Facebook, like a really young picture of him. But recently, because since that Black Sabbath farewell, there's been lots of stuff posted about Black Sabbath and Ozzy online over the last month or so, hasn't there? A lot. And so when I saw that, I didn't really think. I just didn't even twig. And then something caught my eye. I said R.I.P. Ozzy or something like that somewhere. I can't remember what it was. And first of all, I thought it was fake or there's so many fake things posted nowadays. But yeah, I got in the car and I heard it on the radio as well at about 5:30 a.m. in the news on the motorway that John Ozzy Osbourne had passed away at 76 years of age. Only a few weeks after that was a Back to the Beginning Black Sabbath farewell in Birmingham. So really a almost perfect kind of and that sounds ridiculous. I was going to say perfect timing. Let's not say perfect timing, but as far as being able to kind of have a farewell and a last kind of hurrah. And his health was obviously majorly, failing. If he passed away 3 weeks later and he was seated throughout the whole concert, he was suffering from Parkinson's and other things as well, I think. Being able to give that performance, and it was, it wasn't the greatest Aussie performance ever, but for how he was and his age and his condition, I think it was pretty good. And just kind of the overall vibe and feeling around that, I didn't really see anything negative. The only thing negative was about the Disturbed singer, David Draymond, who was booed. But other than that, everything around that whole Black Sabbath farewell was very positive, which was quite rare, really. There's usually kind of a sizable negative criticism of anything that happens nowadays, but that was almost universally not praised, but kind of just like everyone was happy that they got to do that because they deserved that. And then to pass away just 3 weeks later, it's kind of like it's almost at least he didn't die beforehand, I guess is what I'm trying to say. At least he got to have that. And 76 for a rock star, especially of his era, and he's kind of like one of the most noted ragers, drinkers, drug takers, whatever you want to say, in rock history. He's that was kind of what he was known for, as much as his music almost. So he did pretty well out of it. 76 years. A lot of guys don't even see half of that who do the same job. He's a one of a kind, super unique voice. Even though I would say I wasn't the hugest fan of his voice, I wouldn't say I'm the hugest Aussie fan, but I can certainly understand his place in rock and metal history. For a while, I never really like's not the right word. Black Sabbath, I kind of never really gave a chance to for a long time when I was younger. They always kind of had, they sounded very 70s to me, which obviously they were a 70s band. But over time, I especially came to appreciate Tony Iommi's guitar work. That he basically, as much as anyone, invented a whole genre. And I think all four members of the band were important, absolutely. And you take away one person, then maybe it wouldn't have been the same thing. And certainly Ozzy's kind of larger than life presence and his kind of his charisma, maybe you want to call it, was just his persona in general. That was a massive help for Black Sabbath as well. I don't own any Black Sabbath CDs. At one stage, I had a copy of Volume 4. That would have been about 20 years ago now. You don't see them for sale, secondhand. I obviously, if I'd come across Black Sabbath CDs over the last 5 years when I've been hunting through secondhand stores, I would have bought it, absolutely. Never seen a Black Sabbath CD for sale. Old era, 80s era, none of it. And that's pretty common because, for that kind of band, like I've said before, when I say you don't see a lot of certain kinds of bands CDs for sale secondhand, because Black Sabbath has got a pretty dedicated and diehard following. It's not the kind of band in the CD age that would have sold enough to move into that kind of popular. I can't really explain what I'm trying to say here. Certain bands in the the 80s and 90s became so popular that people who weren't even really huge fans bought their stuff, bought their albums. And then when they got rid of their CDs, they just kind of, gave them all to secondhand stores. But Black Sabbath's main popularity was in the 70s, obviously. And they didn't have a major, for example, Led Zeppelin, the secondhand CD of Led Zeppelin you find the most is the remasters. Either the one with the Zeppelin shadow on the crop circles one from, I think, was it 89? Or the more recent one, the red and black one with the kind of stylized socialist realism style Zeppelin. And those are by far the most common Led Zeppelin things, because those were huge, especially that first remasters edition that they released in the late 80s, early 90s. Maybe it was 91. And that kind of gave Zeppelin a second, not that they needed it, but it gave them a second life. Whereas Black Sabbath never had that, which kind of makes you think, if Tony Iommi had taken all the stuff from the Ozzy era, and even from the Ronnie James Dio era, like of Heaven and Hell and whatnot. If you'd taken kind of the best things from that, or the singles or whatever, and remastered them and put them out as a collection, it wouldn't have done as well as Led Zeppelin, because Led Zeppelin were a level above Black Sabbath in popularity. I'm talking about, and in the kind of popular consciousness and culture. But still, you kind of think that would have. I think they would have done something to aid their notoriety more and what they had done, because without Black Sabbath, you can't say without Black Sabbath there would be no metal, but certainly the trajectory of metal would have been different and maybe delayed and gone somewhere else. Because there are other bands, like people talk about Led Zeppelin as their role in the kind of the godfathers of metal, and I can see that as well, but Black Sabbath far more so. And I don't know why that didn't happen, why they didn't have kind of a remasters compilation. Maybe it was legal issues. Like, I know that, they went through a lot of different members. Tony is the only member that stayed the same from beginning to end. Geezer was in and out. Bill Ward was in and out. And they cycled through singers, like I said, Ronnie James Dio. I think they had what's his name? Gillian, the guy from Deep Purple. I think he was in there for a while. Or was it Glenn Hughes? Glenn Hughes was in there for a while. Maybe it wasn't Ian. Maybe it was Glenn Hughes I'm thinking of. Tony Martin in the 90s on the Forbidden one. And I know there was, I don't know how often and how long it went, but there was battles between Iommi and Ozzy or Sharon over the rights to the name, or kind of not having the rights or not. It was kind of more about the share, and maybe that didn't allow them to put out some kind of compilation. I know that Tony Iommi has remastered the albums by themselves subsequently. I was just re-listening to the remastered edition of Forbidden. Now, Forbidden, I think, came out in '94, and the original, I don't know, mixing or production of that album was dog shit. It's one of the worst produced albums of that era, like of a big band. Even though Black Sabbath in the '90s were a shadow of their self of the '70s, but it sounded awful. And maybe it was just my ears. It sounded muddy and kind of like it was recorded in a tunnel. And anyway, I listened to the remaster of that, and much, much better. I don't know what they did. It sounds like some parts of it being actually re-recorded completely. So I'd be interested to kind of find out about what he actually did to those. But anyway, I'm kind of going off track here. This is the only Ozzy CD I own. I have owned other Ozzy CDs in the past. I owned another compilation, the one with the black cover with the gold cross. I also own the album Osmosis at some stage. I bought that secondhand, but this was back a long time ago, secondhand, so it would have been more like $10 or $12 I paid for it. Wasn't the biggest fan of the album, to be honest, Osmosis. Was it Ozman Cometh? I'm thinking of the compilation. The compilation had the song Back on Earth. That was released as a bonus track, like a newly recorded Ozzy track to add to the compilation of older songs. And I love that song. And this is why I talk about having physical media is so important. You can't find that song on Spotify. They don't have it for some reason. You can find it on YouTube, but I don't have YouTube music, so you got to like play it on the video. I wanted to listen to it in the car this morning when I was driving to work, and I had to play the YouTube version. But you need to have the actual CD. That's the only place you could find it. I don't understand why these certain songs, often things like that, bonus songs, you just can't find on Spotify or other streaming services. What's on this one? This is a double disc. This was released 2003. Okay, this is just stuff from his solo career, whereas Ozman Cometh was a combination of Black Sabbath stuff and solo stuff, which is pretty good. I think that was released around 98 when they were doing the reunion tour, the reunion shows. That was around 97, 98, wasn't it? And I think one of the deals, this is what I'm talking about, legalities. One of the deals that Sharon did was if Ozzy agreed, because at this time, Ozzy was a far bigger name than Black Sabbath. Like if Black Sabbath had been touring without Ozzy for years and were not doing super great, but with a reform, like any band, with the original members, and especially with an original member of the pedigree as Ozzy Osbourne, was always going to do much better, and they did. They played huge shows around the world, or around wherever they played. I think one of the deals that if Ozzy agreed to go back into the reformed band in the late 90s, Tony had to give up some of the rights or let Ozzy have more freedom to use some of the Black Sabbath stuff. And so that allowed him to release that Ozman Cometh compilation that had songs like Black Sabbath and War Pigs, Fury Wears Boots. It had a live version of Paranoid. Maybe a Changes. Ozzy did a duet of Changes with Kelly Osbourne, I remember. Like around that time when the Osbourne's reality show was on TV, when they were really trying to cash in on that one. Anyway, what's on this? The songs you'd expect and some that you wouldn't expect. So obviously Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley was live there. I don't know. Suicide Solution, that caused them some problems, didn't it? Goodbye to Romance. Over the Mountain, great song. Over the Mountain, Fire in the Sky, maybe two of my favorite solo Ozzy songs, along with Mama I'm Coming Home. No More Tears, but it's got to be the radio edit. I don't like the super long one, because the reason I don't like the super long one is that it does something to the solo. Oh, that's right. In the solo, in Zakk Wylde's solo, it has this longer build up. Whereas in the radio edit, he goes straight into the solo. That solo that Zakk Wylde does in that song is one of my favorite guitar solos in a song ever. It's like a perfect solo. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's flashy enough, but not over flashy, because over flashy becomes boring and cheesy sounding. It has like power. Obviously he's famous for using pinch harmonics, and he uses those in it. But it's such an awesome guitar solo. And I really love the interlude in the middle of that song, the kind of keyboard, like these kind of orchestral sounding keyboards. And then it has that vocal of "in the bush, just a hand in the bush," something like that. And there's that, again, in the radio edit, it's the perfect length, that interlude. Whereas in the album version, it kind of goes on too long from memory. There's also other parts that they stretch out that I much prefer the radio edit. And that's usually the opposite. Usually, I prefer album versions to radio edits, because radio edits chop things too much, but that's an exception. Yeah, Mama I'm Coming Home is a great song, written by Lemmy, if I'm not mistaken. Perry Mason, great song. See You on the Other Side, that was one of his later era singles. That was kind of from like the early 90s, I think. But yeah, I think that covers, his. Is there Bark at the Moon on here? Doesn't it Bark? Oh, yes, it does, sorry. Track 10. Crazy Babies. Diary of a Madman. It has all the stuff you would expect to have on here, and a few other little bits and pieces that are kind of thrown, like some live versions. I Don't Want to Change the World live. I don't like that song, I Don't Want to Change the World. He's got a live version of Paranoid with Randy Rhoads. Now, I got this secondhand. You can see here it says green dot special. This means it's from Real Groovy Records in the city. I always say this, they change the prices of the color dot specials, so I can't say, oh, it was this. From memory, it would have been around $6, I would guess. I got this quite early in my recollecting days, probably about 5 years ago in 2020 when I'd first come back to New Zealand. There he is with the dove. And these are those solo albums. Okay, so let me see which ones I had, or which one I had. That's the one I'm talking about. That's the compilation I used to have. That's got Back on Earth. There's Osmosis. So I had both of those. They all look familiar because I've seen the covers of all of them before, but that one looks more familiar. Like I had that one as well, but I don't think I did. Don't think I had No More Tears, but who knows. And then we got the Live at the Budokan. I remember they did release that on DVD. Down to Earth was his last album. No, he maybe had something else after that. Did he have something post 2003? He would have had something after 2003. Here's some photos of him. That's the same photo that was used in the other compilation. I remember on the back, this part, that was the photo they used. He's wearing chainmail. Looks very black metal, doesn't he? With the chainmail and the riding boots. Who's written this? Who you reckon wrote? Eddie Williamson. No idea who that is. Now, of course, something that's often forgotten is that Ozzy wasn't, hugely involved in the writing. And there was a controversy. Those early 80s albums like Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, I'm pretty sure they were completely written by Bob Daisley and is it Lee Kerslake was the other one? Yeah, Al Kerslake and R. Daisley. Is it Daisley? Daisley? I'm pretty sure they wrote those. And they came to Ozzy with that when he was first trying to restart his solo career. And then subsequently, they tried to scrub those guys. And then I think even they went on to re-record the albums completely without those guys playing to kind of omit them. Something like that. Which is not very good. Then in Sabbath, Geezer Butler actually wrote most of the lyrics. I don't know if he wrote all the lyrics. Like, for example, I know he definitely wrote Warpigs, the lyrics for that. Warpigs. Whereas Ozzy was more coming up with the vocal melodies. And a lot of times the vocal melodies were simply just singing along with a riff. Just kind of following along. We're not saying that's wrong. But it's obviously he didn't always do that. There's lots of songs where he doesn't use the riff as the vocal melody. But oh, there we have. So Mama, I'm Coming Home, written by O. Osbourne, Z Wild, and Al Kilmister, which that's Lemmy Kilmister. I think his name's Ian Kilmister by birth. Who else he wrote with? Randy Castillo, Zach Wild, obviously. See, Bark of the Moon, written by Ozzy Osbourne, completely by himself. That's not accurate. He didn't. They changed that afterwards. And I don't know how they changed it. If they just, you can't just do that, can you? But I know there was court cases and stuff involving those other guys. Jay Valance, don't know who that is. I'm seeing if he wrote anything with Jake Lee. What's that guy? Jakey Lee, who was a guitarist before Zach Wild, after Randy Rhoads, but for I did know this. No More Tears, Mike Inez, who's now the bassist in Alice in Chains. He did the bass line for that. That. And then he wrote with some kind of outside writers in the later part of his career. Like you can see there, Dreamer, Marty Fredrickson, and Mick Jones. Don't know who they are. I don't know if that's Mick Jones from The Clash. Probably not. And I Just Want You is Jay Valance. Don't know who that is either. There's a lot of songs there's taken from Osmosis. 1, 2, 3, 4. I saw him in concert once, 11 years ago in 2014. It was at a kind of a festival, not really a festival, because there were very, well, I guess there were more acts, but I just didn't see them. It was a 2-day festival. I just went for the 1 day, and I saw the Deftones play for about an hour. And I mean, when they were playing, it was still daylight from memory. But then it got dark, because I've also got a photo I remember where it was dark. I think when they started playing, it was daylight, and then the sun went down as they were playing. And I've talked about this before. I got Steph Carpenter's guitar pick that he threw into the crowd. And then about an hour later, Ozzy Osbourne played. Now, Deftones played out in the kind of front field, and Ozzy played inside in the, was it the Olympic Stadium? No, it was the World Cup Stadium in Seoul, I should say. It's in South Korea, in Seoul. So the World Cup Stadium in, can't remember which area. There's a lot of big stadiums in Seoul, because they had the Olympics there in 1988. And they also hosted the FIFA World Cup in 2002 with Japan. So there's a plethora of huge, 60, 80,000 capacity stadiums around. But he played there, and it was packed. Like it was, tens of thousands of people. It was like a stadium show. And You know, the fact that he can go even to somewhere like South Korea, which is really not the biggest metal country at all. It's actually pretty rare to come across metalheads in Korea, but obviously there's enough of them to go to an Ozzy Osbourne concert and also a Metallica concert, which I saw there as well. It was fine. Like, to be honest, I don't have a lot of memories of it. Um, I've got one or two videos. I remember I took a video at the start of War Pigs, but I don't really take many photos and videos at shows because I just want to kind of enjoy them. But I think for his age, this was 11 years ago, so if he would have been 65, which is still, what's pension age, isn't it? Pension anniversary. Um, he did pretty well. The guitarist was Gus G, and the drummer was the guy who had been touring with Sabbath. Black Sabbath did their last reunion, the one for 13, the album 13, without Bill Ward, and they used a drummer. Who was the drummer? Tommy something? He's got a kind of like a Hispanic sounding name. Anyway, he was the drummer. Who was the bassist? I can't actually remember who played bass at that show. But anyway, Ozzy played all the hits, um, kind of half and half Sabbath and his solo stuff, or maybe more like 60-40 solo Sabbath. But I'm glad I got the opportunity to see him because he didn't really tour New Zealand much at all. I think he toured once when I was a teenager, but you don't have the opportunity to go to those kinds of things as much when you're a teenager. So yeah, I was glad I got to go, and yeah, not much else to say really. I'm sure there will be much said and written about him over the next few days because he's one of the greats. Whether he's truly great, as in like for what he really did, I don't, that's up down to personal opinion. But when you think of rock's pantheon, if I don't want to use that cliche, pantheon of greats, rock gods of, John Lennon and Paul McCartney and Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and Bowie and Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, and I'd say Ozzy Osbourne is in there. He's pretty iconic, and he was part of something with Black Sabbath that started a whole cultural movement that kind of swelled through the 70s and kind of exploded in the 80s, metal, and continues till today. And of course, some would say metal is in decline, but the amount of, different kinds of heavy metal, thrash and power metal and black metal and death metal and doom metal and stoner metal and speed metal and on and on and on. It's a pretty broad family tree now that he was part of planting the seed for. Maybe the most important seed was planted by him and Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler and Bill Ward. So yeah, rest in peace, Ozzy, and we'll leave it there.